Welcome everyone to this session, which has been given the title Palestinian Voices. We have a distinguished panel over here, Adania, Shibli, and William Sieghart. Let me start by saying a few words about Adania and William, and then we will continue. Adania is from Palestine. She was born there in 1974. She's a novelist, an essayist, a short story writer, a playwright, and she has done many other distinguished things, and she's also a professor. She did a PhD at the University of East London, and her thesis was on a very new subject at that time, which was the visual compositions of the war on terror and the role that British and French networks played in that, in this visual composition. She is taught at the University of Nottingham, and she's at the Department of Philosophy and Culture at Birzeit University in Jerusalem. She lives between Jerusalem and Berlin. She's widely published in literary magazines in Europe and in the Middle East. Her works include a book called Dispositions. She conducted that's a non-fiction work, and Journey of Ideas Across Dialogue, in dialogue with Edward Said. That was based on a symposium that she held in Berlin in 2013. Her fiction includes a book called Minor Detail, copies of which were available at the bookshops there. I don't know if they still are. They were selling out very fast. A book called We Are Equally Far From Love, Keep Your Eyes on the Wall, and Touch. And these are short stories. A Minor Detail is a novel. She has been awarded the Young Writers Award of Palestine. She was named one of Beirut 39, which was a group of writers that was chosen. Minor Detail, translated by Elizabeth Jacquet, was shortlisted for the National Book Award in 2020 and was longlisted for the International Booker Prize in 2021. William Sieghart is a British entrepreneur, a publisher, and he's the founder of the Forward Prizes for Poetry, which was set up in 1992. That's what my notes say. Educated at Oxford, he founded Forward Publishing, which is an independent contract publisher. He also started something called the National Poetry Day in 1994, which is a celebration of poetry. He also was responsible for a project called Winning Words, which was at the 2012 Olympics. He's the chair and founder of a group called Forward Thinking, a non-governmental organization that seeks to mediate conflict in the Middle East and to improve relations between the Islamic and Western worlds. He's also the vice president of the Hay Festival, and he's the chair of the Civic Liberties Initiative. He's a founder and chair of Street Smart and Action for the Homeless. He was awarded the CBE, that's Commander of the British Empire, in 2016 for services to public libraries. His most recent books include something called The Poetry Pharmacy from 2017. Volume 2 of Poetry Pharmacy has been published, and Volume 3 is going to be published very shortly. That's my rather long introduction to our distinguished panel. I would like to start by talking to Adania a little bit about her book, Minor Detail. Now, you're probably all wondering why that title. A few words about the book. It's a beautiful account, and when I say beautiful, it is beautifully written originally in the Arabic. Unfortunately, I don't read Arabic. I don't know if any of you do, But I believe it's beautiful to read in Arabic, but I've only read the English translation, which is very, very good. It's a harrowing story, a very, very heart-moving story that starts off during the Nakba in 1945. I'm sorry, 1949. And it's a story about a tribe of Bedouins that was attacked by the Israeli army, and it focuses on the commander of this Israeli army and what he did to and with the tribe. Basically, to make it short, he massacred the whole tribe, and there's a young girl who is tortured, humiliated, and raped by the Israeli forces. That is told in very stark detail, in a voice that is almost dispassionate. It's through the eyes of, and I may be wrong in this, but I read it as if it's through the eyes of the commander, who is completely uninvolved emotionally in any of what's going on. He's doing a job, and his job is to decimate the Palestinians. And all the horrors that take place are sort of like, evil as they are, they're just something that has to be done. The second part of the novel takes us to the present day, and it's a story of a woman who happened to be born on the same day that this horror took place, but 25 years later in 1974, and I'm guessing that that's not a coincidence. Adania was born in 1974.
Could be a coincidence.
Could be a coincidence, but my mind is saying, well, I think you chose that date deliberately because there's a connection. But anyway, this woman hears about this, and to her, it's something terribly important. It's a minor detail in the whole story of the Nakba, and that's why the title of the book, Minor Detail. But this minor detail takes over a quest for this woman to find out more about this event that took place many, many years ago, and to find out what happened, why it happened, and everything else about it. And this second part of the story is told from the point of view of this young woman who is doing this research. So it's two separate stories linked by this very traumatic event. I'd like to ask you if you can enlighten us more about how you came about with the idea of the book, and something more if you'd like to say about that.
Well, I have to confess that each novel starts from a joke. So this novel started with a joke that I heard many, many years ago. And I was fascinated by this joke. The joke goes, and there's somebody goes waiting for the bus, and this person stutters. So he goes board of the bus and asks the driver, how much is the ticket? And the bus driver say, 100 rupees. And he pays, and he goes in the bus. And then another person goes on board of the bus, and they say, hi, how much is the ticket? And the bus driver says, it's 100 rupees. The guy goes back to him, so angry, the stuttering guy, and say, you were making fun of me. And the bus driver says, no, I was making fun of him. And so for me, I was like, how this, when you have the inability to articulate, when in the context of Palestine, language is so much scarred, so much deleted, would you be ever able to speak the language of the powerful? And I think with this question, it was haunting because it's also about what kind of literary form is there for you in a context of Palestine? Because for me, it is the conditions that create writing, create literature in this case. And I was wondering, would I ever be able to write a kind of a coherent narrative from or the perspective of those who speak perfectly? And that was the first part. And it was a big struggle. I mean, it took me a long time to write this novel. And at the same time, then I was haunted by the stutterer, because for me it is, I feel my language is the language of the stutterer. And then it came, the second part came about. And also the absence of the narrative, the absence, the inability, the impossible way of reaching certain words of others. And in the case of the third character in the book, which is the girl who is being kidnapped and transformed into somebody to be raped, basically. And of course, there's also the dog, which I consider him as a character, and the howling, and the things that are beyond language. So I think that was, writing this book was a culmination of so many questions that had been haunting me, I think, since quite a young age, about the impossibility of narrating, perhaps. Yeah.
So clearly language and words are of great importance to you, and one can feel that when reading the book, because there are several, as you say, several voices in the book and several ways that things are expressed. You mentioned the commander, I mentioned the commander, you mentioned the young girl, the dog as a character, the woman who's doing the research. They all speak in a language that is very much theirs, but it's trying to understand something that happened to someone else or elsewhere. And so the use of language becomes almost central to the telling of the story and the importance of words, as you say. And you also said that it's very difficult for you to come to grips with how best to tell a story using language that is coherent. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, in fact, I don't want to tell a story which is coherent ever in my life, but I wanted to try, going back to this joke, I wanted to imitate a coherence. Because for me, it's really important. I mean, the way stories or novels are being written, there is often the linear structure of things. An event takes place, there's the middle, there's the end. And I mean, what if you don't have access to such kind of narratives? And I think you grow up in Palestine with these absences. And how to, for me, it's not a question of fighting that, but trying to understand and even give a place for silence. Because silence, I also have been thinking a lot when I write about silence, and almost, could silence have a place in writing? Could it have a place in a text? And because you grow up with it, and it's almost occupying, it's almost like a living creature with you. And it's not, you don't want to annihilate it, because there is also violence. Maybe this silence came about as a result of violence, but you don't want to subject it again to the same violence of trying to reveal it. And I know there's a lot of this debate on giving voice to somebody, and I find there's quite almost indignity in approaching, as if, what about accepting silence? And taking it is almost as an important element in writing, because writing also takes place in silence. I mean, you're writing in silence. It is a practice in silence. And I think this is perhaps how I came to writing, because of it's almost the ideal activity that you can do in silence, but still silence that embraces your love to language. And including reading. I mean, it's so beautiful, like we both come to language from two sides of the silence, the reader and the person who writes. And it allows you, I think, writing, maybe it allows you as a stutterer to exist. You can wait, you can go back, you can delete. And writing really takes a lot of writing and rewriting and deleting and so on. So it's almost like what is written is equally designed by what is not written.
To go back to this idea of silence and what led to the silence and your ideas about giving voice to that silence. First, in getting back to the book, I mean, it's the Nakba that we are talking about, which is an extremely traumatic event that affected all Palestinians. And I'm thinking that perhaps a way to deal with that trauma is the silence of the people. A lot of people are wanting not to relive that terrible event and the trauma that accompanied that event by silence. So I then understand your idea that you want to give respect to that silence, because it's something that you don't want to violate. But at the same time, you mentioned this idea of a story having a beginning, a middle, and an end, which essentially means some kind of a resolution towards it. Now, we've had the Nakba, we've had the trauma, we've had that, and your story does not have a resolution in that sort of classic sense, because it's such an event that it's very difficult. What kind of conclusion do you come to? But if you just keep accepting that silence and honoring that silence, the chances are that there will never ever be a resolution. There will never be a moving forward or going towards some kind of resolution, which basically is something all humans seek. They seek some form of closure to whatever events they are undergoing. So there seems to be some kind of a dilemma there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, silence can lead us. I also maybe, I don't want a resolution. I don't want that end. Because it's more of the process and contemplating also language. It's very, when you were speaking, I remembered as a kid, and I was really missing the use of certain words. And one of the certain words that I really missed, and I can remember that, like now we are sitting here, how much I miss using the word grandpa, because I didn't have grandpas. I just had these mean grandmothers. They were really mean. And I was always thinking, like, if I just had a grandfather and I could call a grandfather, and I'm sure, like, my grandfather would be the kindest, the warm, the most, have the warmest heart in this world. And, with this missing, I just, like, missed it because I heard other kids saying the word. And, like, you feel the absence of this specific word. But I never asked what happened to my grandparents, my grandfathers, until my grandmother died. And so I just was speaking to my aunt, like, nobody was really sad about the death of my grandmother. She was so mean. She hated everybody. Basically, if you go and say hello to her, she'll look at you like, why are you bothering me with saying hello? And she was like, terrifying you. So just like, don't. And so when she died, I asked my aunt, so how did my grandfather die? And that was in 80, 89. And then my aunt says, like, actually, he was killed in the war in 1948. And that was the first time she spoke about it. And then I was so angry. I went to my father. He was killed by the Zionist militias near. And I was so angry. And I went to my father and I said, why didn't you tell me? And my father, you grow up actually in silence. And my father said, he doesn't even answer that. But then I go back to my aunt, and my aunt says, why did you tell your father I told you that? So the whole story became about not the event of my grandfather being killed, but why you tell the story. And it was very interesting. And then I realized also more about my grandmother. Basically, he was her fourth husband. So she married 4 guys until this person, and she was so much in love with him. And my aunt was telling me that she was so much in love with him that sometimes he goes away. We are Bedouins, like nomads, so he was going away. And she hears from other riders that he came back, and she would go to meet him halfway and recite poetry to him. My mean grandmother, I can imagine her reciting poetry and being like in love with my grandfather. And then you realize, like, there is a shift, actually. The absence of a person that she loved most. And she lived most of her life as a widow, though she married 4 guys previously. And you realize, like, there is something within that silence, but it's not about telling the story. For me, it is a knowledge, but for me, understanding how she came about this silence, what this silence had been there, and actually respecting her silence. For me, this story is not like, did not allow me to break her silence, but as much as to appreciate it. And actually, how can you narrate such a loss if you experience that? A loss that makes you almost lose your humanity. You grow up waiting for death on a sofa all of your life. Yeah.
Wow. Now, the reverse of silence is, of course, words and language. And clearly, you, from the symposium you held and whatever, you are familiar with the works of Edward Said and his ideas on linguistics and the use of language and the use of words. He laid an incredible amount of importance to how words can be used to express not just ideas and move forward, but how the same words can have multiple meanings to different people, because the way they're used and the way they're received, the analogy that you brought up between the reader and the writer, what the writer puts down may be perceived differently by 2 different readers. I think Edward Said put it down in terms of philosophical thought and linguistics, that the same idea pervades all human language and interaction. Now, by articulating the kind of traumatic events and the silence in your book, are you moving that idea forward by sort of, in a sense, giving words to events that are almost impossible to describe in words?
I think in the book there is something that also was part of working with this novel. It's like how words travel. It's not about how words change their context as much as they travel in time, like something that you say in 1949, and then when you say it in 2005, 2010, it's completely a different place, as if the words travel the whole way to reach somewhere else. And with several words, suddenly they become haunting the characters, I think, both traveling with that. And I don't know, sometimes you think like or I think about, or have been thinking about the complicity of language in a crime, and how, which language can carry a crime or make it disappear as well. And it's interesting that you mention Edward Said, because I mean, I came across, of course, we come across first or often with his book Orientalism. But I think there is an amazing book, this Out of Place, that he wrote. And this is almost like it's the last thing that he wrote. It's almost the last thing that he wrote. It was his memoir when he was diagnosed with cancer, when he was in treatment. And that book recounts language in a different way. I mean, there are many different experiences of language. I'm not proposing my experience of language is the experience. It's just one of them. And I think this is a generosity of language, that it's so much, it's there for everybody, and everybody can create a relationship to it. And for me, what was interesting is like how Edward Said actually denied Arabic language. It's a language I love. I mean, normally I'm not a very happy person, but I'm so happy I was born in Arabic language. There is this playfulness with the language. There's the richness, there's the openness, and the freedom of it that is fascinating. But then you start reading Edward Said, and the way he gradually loses his relationship to Arabic. And it's very interesting, this loss, because this loss happens in 1948, because he lived in Jerusalem until 1948. And then after that, he was in Cairo. And he explains, actually, in Out of Place, how being in exile or living in Cairo kind of broke his relationship to Arabic. Because in Palestine, you have a very strong relation to Arabic that is established by thinkers like Sakakini, by all these experiments in language at this time until 1948. And what's this kind of moment, how he describes and his loss of Arabic, and eventually not only a loss of a language, but all what language allows. And what language allows, I just mentioned Khalil Sakakini, who's a great thinker. He was an educator, a poet, the multidisciplinary mind that you would have at these times. And he describes in his memoirs, he wrote memoirs every day until his death in 1953, and he was exiled from Palestine, or sought refuge in 1948 as well, leaving behind him his library, all the books that he read, and he had an amazing library. And why I mention this library? Because in 1917, this is during the First World War, when Palestine was under Ottoman rule, the Ottoman authorities, they issued a decree that all Americans should hand themselves to the authorities. So one person doesn't hand himself to the authorities. This is a Jewish American called Arthur Levine. And he comes knocking on the door of Sakakini at night in November. And Sakakini opens the door late at night, and he sees Levine standing there. And this is the opening of the door. And Sakakini immediately thinks, what should I do? I mean, if I let him in, I am going to go against the rules of the state, which it was punished by execution. So if you let an American at your place, you would be punished. Even if you let him knowingly or unknowingly, you are going to be executed. So he thinks, I might be killed. But then he remembers at the same time the books that are in his library. And all these books, including poetry, about the need to open your place for anyone who's seeking refuge. And this is in Arabic poetry also, there's a Hatem al-Tai, we grew up with this, he also even protects a hyena from a hunter. And he recalls all these poems, and of course he says, whom should I betray? Should I betray my government or my language? And of course he chooses to betray the government, because he says, I cannot betray my language. So these, I'm bringing these two because I'm thinking sometimes about Edward Said and all the lack of access to what Sakakini almost used as his ethical ground, how he acted. And sometimes I'm also going back, about the loss of libraries, about the loss of language in these cases, like what are we losing on the level of our humanity? Not about in terms of a resolution, but these absences of something. But I don't want to lament that. I mean, like we try in a situation like how you can transform the conditions from them being of a loss into something else. And I think this is what you have to do in such context, and not given into the despair of the loss, and even kind of longing to an imagined past that often ends up in a very dangerous and nationalistic kind of places. Yeah.
Thank you. If we can take this idea of Edward Said a little forward and bring William into the conversation. Now, Edward Said, he basically started off, and he had this, what you earlier referred to, this loss of his Palestinianness, in a sense, when he went into exile in Cairo and then lived in Lebanon, and then moved to the US and became a US citizen, a Palestinian American, and became highly regarded and highly revered by the academic community and started writing. He then went back to the question of Palestine because it never left him. And when he started writing about the question of Palestine, he went from remembering what he remembered from the past and taking it forward to seeing how to seek some kind of resolution to this seemingly never-ending conflict. And I'd like to turn to William now, because you started this civil society organization, which basically deals with the whole idea of conflict resolution, with a focus on the Middle East and resolving the problems and a dialogue between the Islamic world and the Western world. The idea that words matter, what you say to each other, how you communicate ideas across this divide, is going to be crucial to any resolution. Now, you mentioned, Adania, earlier that perhaps you're not even interested in a resolution at this point, maybe because you have your reasons for it. We have William, who clearly believes that we have to somehow move towards a resolution, or at least attempt a resolution, attempt to come to a resolution. Any thoughts on that, William?
Well, to begin with, first of all, because I come from a world of poetry, I understand about silence, and I understand about the spaces between the words, which are as important as the words themselves. And I also understand that someone can read a poem, one can read a poem off the page and read it the next day and get a completely different sense from it. And in fact, that can go on for many days and many weeks. So I'm intrigued by what you're saying about language. However, in another hat, I work in conflict mediation, and I believe in dialogue. It seems to me that silence during conflict, or in terms of not addressing conflict, is very dangerous. And conflicts often get reduced down to single-liners that human beings use to sum up conflicts. And this is one of the great tragedies of the Israel-Palestinian situation, in particular the Palestinian situation, because there is a sort of, as you travel around the world discussing it with people, there is a sense of fatigue and a sense, I think, of people no longer asking the crucial questions about the conflict or the plight of the Palestinian people, and that is really tragic. And so, having worked in this conflict for about 20 years now, I'm just perhaps heartbroken that it's very hard to refresh people's minds to the situation and get them to see it in a new light. But the light that they do see it in is one of intractability, is one of it will never change, is one of there are other things to worry about. It's not our top priority because it's been going on for so long. When I engaged with the US administration, which I did quite a lot through the years, the senior person in the State Department I used to go and see always used to have this line, which is, what number is it? What number is this conflict on the agenda of the White House? And if it wasn't in the top 3, no one would pay any attention to it.
Any thoughts on how we move forward, how we bring people to a dialogue, to exchange of words and ideas, and getting over the silence? Because, you know, we have this terribly kind of collective trauma of all the Palestinian people. I mean, I don't think there's a single Palestinian that I know of or am aware of or have read of that has not in some way been affected by the trauma that befell them. Now, this collective trauma has led to, as you said, silence in many ways for many people, but it also needs to be articulated, because unless we do that, no one will understand fully the plight of the Palestinian people. And that's where your thoughts would be helpful, both of your thoughts. So if we can have a sort of a discussion along these lines, that would be very useful for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's
And
very
for all of us,
interesting because I think you have different takes on that. And what I'm trying to say, to avoid actually speaking about, I think there's have been a lot of indignity, because it's always kind of alienating from a position of not kind of constantly presenting yourself. This and I see it. It's quiet. I'm talking about that because of the many traps as well I saw when trying to break the silence. I mean, I'm not against language. I'm not against people speaking, but the conditions of speaking that has been so far laid in the context of Palestine has quite a lot of indignity, because, and this is very interesting because it's about also the tools of history versus literature. I think in the language of Palestinians, they're constantly being asked to be objective with facts and concise. And this is an impossible condition of language. You know, it's not about history or documents. You don't have this access to that. And I think what is left to you in that situation is really literature, because you're constantly like, no, you're not accurate. No, we have these facts, and it's always, I mean, I witness it so often. No, it's not like 53 people who were killed, but there are 51. And so the whole debate becomes about the number, because you missed, it's almost like, you know, the story of my grandmother. It becomes like the event of the language rather than the event itself. And maybe there is a reason. Maybe there is a reason for this inaccuracy. What I'm trying to say, I think there's an important place for, if this is the experience, in this case, of someone in Palestine with language, it should be also accepted and put on the same place when those who are asking to know are being, it's almost a position of power, I would say. So this also goes back to the joke, to allow a place for this fluency. And also, you know, even like, you know, the thing with in the case of Palestine, you're constantly in a trap of language. For instance, like you can never talk about Palestine because you're always already fighting with language, already struggling with language. For instance, even the term conflict, because this is not my experience of the situation in Palestine. It is a situation of colonization and occupation. And you know, the minute I hear the word conflict, I mean, I don't hear the remain of the question. And I see that it's just an example. Like, you see how many, so many ways you're constantly there with language, and how do you deal with these terms, and what do they mean, and what they invoke in your mind. And you see how it is, like, this is so funny, because when you try to speak to a Palestinian to explain, then always they go back, what happened in 96, what happened in 73, what happened in 40, and then it goes back, and then you start going back and back and back, and people are already left, They are not there to hear your long story, because this is a long story that you try to find your entry. And for me, I am really I would like to listen to that. I would like to listen to that impossibility of a narrative. And I know your position, you need something else. And I respect that, but I say it's not my way. It's not my entry to language. And it's not about the question of even the resolution, because when you think about a resolution, what is a resolution? Constantly we're being kind of proposed, one state, two states, one state, two states. And I also think, in the context of Palestine, what are we? If we go back to Sakakini and his idea of adab. Adab is literature in Arabic, but also adab is ethics. So what kind of literature and ethics that can bring a different practice? So for me, sometimes I relate to Palestine as almost a teacher for a different type of imagination. I don't want a resolution of a state, because, we experienced what states and nation states created in terms of pain. The suffering in Palestine is a direct consequence of nationalism and the creation of a nation state. So do you want to replicate the same structure that causes all this to you, and to follow its narratives, and also even the kind of historical justifications and then of this causing the pain in the context of Palestine? And for me, it's not even about a resolution, it's about an opening to a different type of imagination. And it's really important how you don't replicate. And I think yesterday there have been some speaking about systems and replicating structures and of the colonizer. And do you want to replace that? Because we see it also in the case of Palestine with the Palestinian Authority. And it's almost like, you're taking the soldier in the watchtower and replacing them by a Palestinian fighter or somebody who resisted the Israeli occupation. But the problem with the tower will continue to produce the same structure of surveillance. And I think this is what we're thinking about, what I'm thinking about. And if we transform it also to the novel, to the form of the novel, because it is, strangely and funnily, it is also, the novel appeared in the same time almost as nationalism appeared, if we follow that line of thinking of print capitalism and so on. So what do you do with a novel? What type of different literature can open up the imagination to thinking of different ways of being together? So I don't want to replicate, they tell a story and I'm going to tell my story. No. I would like to come to that with the knowledge, with the possibilities that have not been allowed, that have been denied as something legitimate. Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, William? I mean, there's a lot to chew, but
well, no, because we come from different worlds, and so what I get involved with is really, I think that warring communities, states, nations, regions ultimately will only settle their differences in human dialogue. And I think one of the heartbreaking things which is peculiar particularly to the situation in Palestine is that people aren't talking to each other. And the only way ultimately you settle any kinds of differences, conflicts, whatever words you like to use for them, is is to engage. And I don't agree with people saying, I won't talk to somebody who won't recognise my right to exist, or I won't talk to somebody, whatever it may be. Talking to other human beings is a human responsibility, especially if you're responsible for other human beings. And sadly, in this fractured and dangerous world that we exist in, many communities don't talk to each other, and so my NGO tries to provide that channel of communication. And ultimately, in the end, having worked with people like the South Africans and the people in Northern Ireland, whatever your conflict, whatever your difference, in the end, it's understanding the essential humanity of your enemy, and that leads you to an opportunity to perhaps stop killing each other. If you don't engage with your enemy, it's very easy to demonize them and give them horns and a tail, and to lose your understanding of the essential humanity of the other. And that's how we get into irreconcilable and endless anguish, and we don't want that.
I don't think there is like no people are not speaking to each other. I think there is a lot of speaking, but there's a certain way of speaking and not hearing. I you know, that's you never. And I think I actually it's very important to think. I don't think that Palestinians, or actually the colonized, I don't know in general. The idea of enmity is very, I think, problematic, because it's also simplifying. I mean, in Palestine, Israel, people are constantly in contact, but it is a specific contact. It's a contact of power. I mean, I speak to an Israeli soldier, he tells me, give me your papers, say, there they are, and then where did you come from, where do you go? There is a specific type of speaking. And this is, I think it's very unwanting in a certain way. And for me, I don't want to deny that. I don't want to present something that is not there, or not like that. It's basically the relations of power are very detailed. They go into your life, and they are in constant dialogue with you. They're haunting you. It's not like you sit there and I'm like, no, I'm not going to speak to you. Of course, you're constantly speaking. You're shouting. You're begging. You're convincing. You're being charming. Any form to challenge these power structures, you're trying to do. So there's nothing. But it is what type of way of speaking. I think it's very, very important to take on that as well. No? Yeah.
Well, I think we can have this debate endlessly. We have limited time. Perhaps we might want to invite a few questions from the audience. And I see several hands being raised. I don't know how exactly to prioritize. But perhaps the lady in the front gets first priority because I can see her best. And then we have a few other. So we have about just a little over 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So please.
Adania, does it work? Adania, I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for your work. So I was born in Lahore, but I actually live in New York, and I'm very much a part of the Palestine movement, solidarity movement. And as you know, the United States is also a settler colony. So there are many parallels between the Palestinian struggle and the struggles for social justice that are happening in the United States. And I've read Minor Detail. It's an absolutely stunning book. Thank you so much for writing it. And I just wanted to talk about the language that we had talked about initially, how dispassionate it is. And it almost made me think of like a colonial survey or a colonial log. And it's it aligns very beautifully with how occupation and even genocide can be very bureaucratic. So I was wondering if you could say something about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to what I was trying before to say, that how it's almost like how you can shift your position to language. And it was not easy. I mean, and I should confess, like, I had help from, I had an Israeli friend that I constantly go to him, and he's like, I need your help. And he says, yeah, what can I do? And then I say, how do you shave in the military? He's like, you call me for that? Okay. And each time he gets excited, and no, it's about that. And it's really, I should always, like, acknowledge his constant, like, almost allowing me to be in a position of that position of language. I think I could not have done it without him. But then, at a certain moment, I was thinking, but maybe I have that. Maybe I don't have the technicalities, because it's not a point of you thinking. I mean, it's very interesting. Like, we can hold that ability to cause pain to others. It's within us. And I think for me, it was like a very hard moment also, going into that, like, which is my ability to cause pain? And it's almost like, going to the extreme with yourself. It's not easy, and extreme also with language. So all of that, eventually leads you to this. But it was really, it was so much work. It's so much work, so much going back to work with dictionaries, with this friend, with maps, with everything. It's almost, I wanted to create the situation only to say, I don't want to be there as well. I don't know if this answers.
Thank you. Maybe over here. And can we just please make the questions as brief as possible and make it a question, not any long commentary? Thank you.
Dina, that was an incredible conversation. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you, how did you make it to getting your book published? Because there is such a consensus in the art world and the literary world of conversations which are allowed and which are not allowed.
Thank you.
Yeah. I couldn't take it.
Sorry? How did you get your book published, considering that it's such a controversial subject?
Okay.
Right.
It's not working.
We can't hear you, so can you please do something about that?
There are many conversations, and there is a consensus of what is allowed in the art world and the literary world. So I wanted to ask you, how did you manage to get through, and how did you manage to get the book published and to make it to where you are?
I don't know how to answer that. I only know that I need to write. Then maybe. I think there's also a lot of support within, writers and friends, and it's really, it's fascinating, like the amount of generosity one is being surrounded with. And of course, you have impossibilities, but with that, it's there, but also there are possibilities. And yeah, I'm really grateful to friends.
Next, yeah.
Okay, my question is that your most of works are translated into English or into different other languages. We are talking about languages. So don't you find that these powerful languages, they are making difficult for you to communicate the voice of the subalterns? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're hitting on something really. It's something I actually deal with difficulty. I don't focus on the translation because it's something else. It is about also living Arabic language. It's a language I love so much, so dearly, and luckily I don't speak all languages on earth, but those who, like English, I think translators hate me because I really, there's a big struggle. It's for me, it's the leaving of Arabic. Or actually, the struggle sometimes with translators is how, because their argument is always like, no, we have to translate it correctly. And I say it's not about correctness. I don't want a correct English. I would like it even almost to carry the accent of Arabic, because also my Arabic is not correct. You know, like grammatically, I try to, you know, this is, for me, that goes back to how you can also allow the injuries and the scars in language, and not to go into this perfect language. And there's a lot of conversations with translators on maintaining a scar, maintaining and respecting and allowing this possibility of a scarred language, and even a memory of Arabic. And it happens sometimes in the structure of a language. And it's very interesting, you know, this kind of where the verb comes, where's the noun, where's the adjective, and how you can sometimes just shift it. It's almost like, you know, brings you again to face language, to also respect language somehow.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for the fascinating talk. I wish there was more time and we could listen to more of your ideas. I wanted to ask, as a Palestinian writer, do you feel pressurized to write about just one subject or stories related to one subject, you know, about just the Nakba or about just the ongoing conflict between Palestinians and Israelis, you know? What about everyday, ordinary stories, and do Palestinians feel as if, you know, they are not important enough?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the story of my grandmother. You see how stubborn my grandmother is? I'm like worse than her, so nobody can pressure me. It's not about pressure, it's about sensibility, I think. And it's really like trying to hear, you know, almost that the unconscious of what's there. And it's I think the ordinary, sometimes this is the ordinary is these conditions. There's not like, it's not like you have the luxury of stepping in or out of it. Actually, the occupation, colonization is designed in a way that when do you wash your clothes? You know, so normally it's on Thursdays because there are water cuts. So it's something that it's everywhere. It decides what you eat, what you wear, when you take a shower, all of these. And in that sense, you know, it comes within the structure of a novel. Even if you, you know, it's not, that's what sometimes I say, it's not about Palestine, but it is with and from. It's the conditions of even the movement of the characters. By the way, I mean, this novel also, because before I was writing about these characters that they don't move, and I was fed up. And I promised myself, in my next novel, my character is gonna move. And I think this is this kind of promise that I was fed up with my characters, because one character for 40 pages was lying in bed. She didn't go out, just in bed. And I say, I don't want to see you in my next book. But this is the problem. The minute that I had a character moving, the character, like, you know, needs to have all these checkpoints and things. And so sometimes when they don't move, there's almost a design why they shouldn't move. So it is also influenced with that. You know, when you think it's not influenced, I don't know if,
If I can just add something to it, Adania has also written many short stories and plays. They don't all deal with the Nakba. They deal with several subjects.
Yeah. Now, only this one because I moved the character. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Now, I will have them sit now. Don't worry. They're not going to move.
I'm sorry, we don't have much time.
Right.
Just one last question, if I may.
Yes,
There's a
mine
lady
will
over
be
here.
a very short question. I'm Surur Akbar, and it's been a pleasure to hear you and to know all about your endeavors in publishing this book. It must have been a Herculean task. But actually, my question is to the gentleman sitting on your right. He suggested, you know, the best way to avoid a confrontation is not to engage with the enemy. But you see, you must define the word enemy. Because here the enemy is larger than life. So it's not possible to try and live with an enemy who is in your veins, in your blood system. All right.
I completely understand, and I spent a lot of my life in Gaza, and I understand the difficulties and the indignities and the humiliations daily that people go through. I'm a Catholic. I'm not a Jew or an Arab or a Muslim, so I'm able to at least try and help conversations move forwards. But as I said, I believe in human dialogue as fundamentally the only way to resolve difficulties, and my little NGO does its best to keep communication going between sides of people who don't engage at all.
Thank you. On that optimistic/pessimistic note, we can perhaps bring this session to an end. Thank you very much. And if you have any further questions, I'm sure both Adania and William will be around to address them for you. Thank you.